I've never seen you as fired up in a long time. You were very excited for the Jay Freddy Kevin Blackwood match. You were screaming and yelling and multiple F bombs, and you were running around ranting. And
These allegations are without merit, and I intend to vigorously defend myself against them. As it's a good PR line I've learned over the years. But no, it was a good time. But Jesse joins us from the Boston area, correct?
yep,
Correct.
How are you, Jesse?
I'm doing good. Um, it'd be interesting to look back and see if like where this like last 3-week period would rank on like just crazy wrestling news um moments. Like remember when MJF didn't go to the Fan Fest at AEW? Remember when that was a big story? And that was like 2 weeks ago.
And MJF
And that was like a
struggling to
month
stay
ago
in the
now.
news cycle. The Jeff Hardy DUI arrest. What other big stories have happened besides the Vince story, which is going to be the only focus of our
The
of our
Sasha
conversation
Banks
today?
Naomi story, if you want to go back to that one, and then obviously there was a pseudo kind of update this week about it. It's definitely the makings of a terrific Between the Sheets episode down the line.
10 years from now, yes. So let's we will pull up the slides here. And Gullo, how can people participate today if they wish?
yeah. So while you're watching here on YouTube, you see there's a little dollar sign, and it says "Show your support for Wrestlenomics," and you can ask a question in there with your dollar amount. So, and if it's on topic at that time, we'll discuss it there. If it's something to leave to the end, we'll leave it towards the end. But I feel like we really have one main topic today, so most of them will be on topic.
One main topic with many subtopics, I would say. So we'll get people up to speed. We did do a breaking news episode on Wednesday night, on Wednesday evening. Our company popularity plans to do so this company popularity analysis for the new data that we received in May. That was interrupted, and we did instead coverage of the story that came out that day, Wednesday, June 15th, 2022, in the Wall Street Journal. Headline: WWE board probes secret $3 million hush pact by CEO Vince McMahon, sources say, with the subheading: company says relationship was consensual and is cooperating with the inquiry. So just in case people are not up to speed, or I think there are probably a lot of people who are aware sort of what's happening, but maybe the details aren't super clear. So Gullo, why don't you read us through what our notes are on this Wall Street Journal report that came out on Wednesday?
Yep. WWE's board of directors is investigating $3 million settlement that Vince McMahon agreed to pay a departing employee who he had an affair with, according to documents and people familiar with the board inquiry. The employee separated from WWE in January 2022. She was hired as a paralegal in 2019. She signed a non-disclosure agreement, and the board investigation began in April and has found additional older NDAs that involve claims by former female employees of WWE of misconduct by Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis, current head of talent relations. Wall Street Journal doesn't know how many previous agreements there are that are being scrutinized. The board's only findings are that Vince used personal money to pay former female WWE employees, plural, who signed NDAs, including one that involves allegations against Laurinaitis. The law firm is also scrutinizing the company's compliance and human resources programs, as well as the company culture. WWE, the company, is cooperating fully with the board inquiry, and the relationship with the former paralegal was consensual. The company takes the allegations seriously and is dealing with them appropriately. Vince's lawyer, Jerry McDevitt, said in a letter to Wall Street Journal, the former paralegal didn't make any claims of harassment against Vince. WWE did not pay any monies to the former employee on her departure. The board found out that the $3 million payment through a series of anonymous emails from someone described to be a friend of the former paralegal. The first email was sent to board members on March 30th and alleged that Vince first hired her, with a $100,000 salary, then raised her salary to $200,000 after the two began a sexual relationship. The friend also alleged in the email that Vince gave her like a toy to John Laurinaitis. My friend was so scared she quit after Vince McMahon and lawyer Jerry paid her millions of dollars to shut up, the first email read. The board received on Sunday, June 12th, a copy of the $3 million agreement, and the NDA included a upfront $1 million payment, and the additional $2 million were to be paid over 5 years.
Sure. So the problems that the board is investigating here are the fact that Vince made payments to this former employee. There would be questions, obviously, about whether or not he used company money. It looks like everybody agrees that he used personal money to pay those payments. However, as you mentioned in one point there, the paralegal was given a raise from $100,000. I was looking it up to see like what the typical payment is for a paralegal in the New York City area. Looks like it's well under $100,000, but nonetheless, I don't know. It's a private company. Maybe W pays especially well, $100,000. But then her salary was raised to $2,000 when the two began a sexual relationship. So that's going to be a problem. And there's a huge power imbalance between a paralegal in WWE and the CEO, as well as the head of relations in the form of John Laurinaitis. And it sounds like from the report that there are more of these NDAs, more of these payments. So as we sit here today, the Wall Street Journal has not written another installment of this, other than they have reported on the press release that happened on Friday, which we'll get to. But there may be more here. We'll see. It looks like the Wall Street Journal, if anybody's going to follow up on this story, it's going to be the publication that ran the original report. Just to give some people some background as far as what can happen here, Vince is obviously or was the CEO, the chairman of the board, but he's also the largest shareholder, and because he has special family stock that gives each one of his shares 10 times the voting power of anybody else's shares, he has 80% of the votes. So when it comes to electing the members of the board of directors, it doesn't really matter what anybody else votes. He controls the company unless he sells a lot more of his stock. And for some further background, who are the members of the board of directors? There are, up to this point, at least until Vince steps down from being a member of the board of directors, there's Vince McMahon, who is the chairman, and then there's 3 other executives who work full-time for WWE. That's Stephanie McMahon, Nick Khan, Paul Levesque, and then there are the 8 independent members of the board of directors. They're all executives or former executives for media companies or other major businesses, including Jeffrey Speed, former executive at Six Flags, Erica Nardini, the CEO of Barstool, Steve Payman, who used to be the COO of Beyonce's production company. He is now the president of Verzuz, which is a Triller company. Manjit Singh, who used to be an executive with Sony. Steve Koonin, who is the president of the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena. Ignace Laoud, who is an executive for, if I can pronounce this correctly, Maid Al Fatam, which is a mall company in the Middle East. And Connor Schell, former EVP of content for ESPN, now works for a production company that he founded, and Alan Wexler, SVP of Innovation at General Motors. So what I gather from the Wall Street Journal report is that it is those 8 independent members who are not WWE employees, who are independent members of the board of directors. It's to them to run this investigation and to look into the wrongdoing that Vince and John Laurinaitis may have done here. As far as what the power the board actually has, I know this is a natural question that a lot of people have brought up, and I'm trying to understand what the power is. Like we mentioned, Vince has 80% of the votes, so based on that fact, you might think that, well, nobody can make Vince do anything. I'm under the impression that the board can, in fact, fire Vince McMahon if they see fit. What would be their justification for doing so? There is a W Code of Conduct that anybody can find on the corporate website. It lists a number of examples of prohibited conduct, and it's conspicuous that in the July 2020 version of the W Code of Conduct, there were 3 items that were listed as prohibited, including interfering with a person's ability to perform their job, creating an offensive work environment, etc., inappropriate physical touching. What is the third note here? Any threat or actual retaliation against any person, filing claims of unlawful harassment. And then those were the 3. And then in July 2020, just one more item was added here. And that item is the grant or offer of an employment quid pro quo for personal intimacy. It raises questions about was there some incident that happened here around or just before July 2020 that led to this item, this list of items being added to the Code of Conduct. I don't know, but it is conspicuous. More importantly, Vince McMahon does have an employment agreement, which was published in a SEC filing in November 2010. As far as I can tell, it is still a valid agreement. It was amended in April 2018, around the time that Vince was working on relaunching the XFL. So his employment agreement does state that he can be terminated by the company. I would think the company in this case would be the board of directors. There's a number of conditions under which the board can fire him for cause, including the executive's intentional perpetration or attempted perpetration of fraud. Maybe that would apply to giving the paralegal a raise from $100,000 to $200,000, maybe. But then there's also this other condition that's listed: the executive's willful and intentional material misconduct in performance of his duties or gross negligence of his duties other than the executive's disability, including an intentional failure to follow any applicable company policies or directives. Maybe the Code of Conduct would be one of those policies. Maybe there's other policies within WWE that are not public. So those may be the conditions that are being considered as far as, can the board really fire him? I think they can under those conditions. Now couldn't the board, couldn't Vince just fire the board? Couldn't they just get rid of him? Or I'm sorry, couldn't he just get rid of the people who want to fire him? And I don't think he can. The board is elected, and I believe every member of the board of directors is reelected every April at WWE's annual shareholders meeting. Again, the results of that election are kind of moot because there's one person who controls 80% of the votes, and that's Vince. But I don't believe that Vince can just fire the board at any moment he chooses. If the board decided to fire him, he can't fire them first, is my understanding. He perhaps could... he would be able to decide who the next members of the board of directors are, or at least he would be voting on who the next members of the board of directors are in the following April. Lord knows what would happen between whenever he would hypothetically be fired and the following April. And the degree to which who decides the nominations of the board are not clear to me. As people may know, it's often the same members of the board of directors who are on the board for years and years at a time. So that's not super clear to me as far as who gets nominated and how they get nominated. But the board, I think I can say this, the board, at least at a minimum, could at least temporarily fire him. Whether or not he could get power back, I don't know. So I just want to go over some moments in the timeline here, just to lay this out. I think it'd be helpful, and then we'll maybe have some conversation about this before we move on. March 30th, according to the Wall Street Journal article, March 30th. So just before WrestleMania, to put that in some tangible context, that's when the board of directors gets the first anonymous email from the person who is described as a friend of the paralegal. And then in April, according to the Wall Street Journal article, the board of directors begins an investigation. May 19th, that's when Stephanie announces her leave of absence. Who knows if Stephanie is aware of the investigation? I would be guessing to speculate. June 3rd, so Stephanie has announced her temporary leave of absence to spend time with her family, according to her. Then on June 3rd, Business Insider reports that Stephanie was removed by Vince McMahon. Fightful and other wrestling media publications would dispute that. And then on June 12th, the board of directors, according to the Wall Street Journal report, they received a copy of the settlement agreement between the paralegal and Vince from Vince's lawyer. And then on June 15th, that's when the Wall Street Journal report itself comes out. So there's that, as I want to say. We have more. But any thoughts from Jesse at this point?
Two important distinctions just in regards to the reporting on the case here. The first being is a lot of people are saying that, well, this was a consensual relationship between Vince and the paralegal. WWE said, WWE in their statement said it was a consensual relationship, which doesn't necessarily mean that that's what actually happened. So I think that's an important distinction that people should be making in the court of public opinion. And ultimately, I think the fallout from this will be what the public opinion is on Vince and the company. And the second thing also being that, as Gullo reported in the notes section, the paralegal didn't feel comfortable and no longer works for the company. So I see some people trying to frame it like, oh, it was a consensual relationship and she got a lot of money from it. What's wrong with that? And I think that's a very disingenuous framing of the situation. And just kind of want that to clarified out there that the situation is different than that based on what we know.
Okay. So we'll that was Wednesday. As Gullo and I were going through our pre-show meeting here. So much has happened, and I forgot that was Wednesday, and then on Thursday we do have one additional news item in the timeline, and that is that this Scott and Scott law firm comes out with a press release Thursday evening. Whenever there's trouble afoot in a publicly traded company, it seems that there's a law firm not too far away looking for a shareholder class action. So, Gullo, tell us what we learned from Scott and Scott attorneys on Thursday evening.
Yep. So, reading here, and the headline was World Wrestling Entertainment Investigation Alert. Scott and Scott attorneys at Law LLP investigate WWE's directors and officers for breach of fiduciary duties. But here's what it read. Scott and Scott, a national securities and consumers rights litigation firm, is investigating whether certain directors and officers of World Wrestling Entertainment have breached their fiduciary duties to WWE and its shareholders. If you are a WWE shareholder, you are encouraged to contact attorney Joe Pettigrew for additional information. Scott is investigating whether members of the WWE board of directors or senior management failed to manage WWE in an acceptable manner in breach of their fiduciary duties to WWE, and whether WWE and its shareholders have suffered damages as a result. On June 15, 2022, the Wall Street Journal reported that WWE was investigating an alleged $3 million settlement that CEO Vince McMahon agreed to pay in January 2022 to a former WWE employee with whom he allegedly had an affair.
So a shareholder class action lawsuit would not be an unfamiliar situation for WWE. There was a shareholder class action lawsuit that just recently resulted in a settlement for shareholders surrounding what the shareholder class alleges were misleading statements from WWE executives about WWE's MENA TV rights deal. It's a Middle East North Africa TV rights deal, which only recently was finalized. Basically, shareholders alleged that they were led to believe that there was a big MENA TV rights deal coming up. It never materialized, or at least didn't materialize with the value that shareholders say they expected. This resulted in allegedly damage to shareholders. Shareholders, basically, depending on how many shares you owned during a certain amount of time, you get some money because of that. WWE's insurance, liability insurance, took care of that for WWE. And then in 2014, there was also a shareholder class action lawsuit after WWE kind of hyped up the expectations of their TV rights deal. This is around the time of the launch of the network, and I think the launch of the network ended up interfering with WWE's ability to leverage a better TV rights deal at the time. Shareholders alleged that they were misled about the value of the company in essence. So I don't think this is anything too unusual for a company. Like I said, whenever there's sort of problems at a publicly traded company about what the value of the company is, or any reason why shareholders would be really upset, it seems like there is a law firm that's ready to launch a lawsuit against them that would benefit them and as well as shareholders. So that's what happens on Thursday.
Real quick, Brandon, I have a question
Yes.
on that. Would the big point that Scott and Scott would make is that they didn't say that we were investigating this in April, that this came out because of a Wall Street Journal article and not from a public statement from the WWE board of directors, the WWE itself?
That's a good question. So what are they saying here? They're investigating.
It's very vague.
Certain directors and officers breached their fiduciary duties to W and its shareholders. The law firm is investigating whether members of W's board of directors or senior management failed to manage W in an acceptable manner. Yeah, I mean, so this would be my speculation, is that, hey, look, if W is going to be, the value of W as a company is going to be, really damaged here in terms of they have at a minimum a PR problem now, which may damage their value to business partners and to advertisers and sponsors. And the executives and W as a company did not do what they should have done to prevent this or to deal with it earlier, and that's going to cause damage to the value of the company, which means it causes damage to the shareholders who own shares in the company. That would be my read on the situation. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll go to Friday. And Friday morning, I woke. I think I wake up sometimes around 7:30, and I've already got an email. I've got some texts on Friday morning, and I go, "Oh no, what's happened?" So at 7:02 a.m., WWE has sent out a joint press release from both the company and its board of directors. What does it say, Chris Gullo?
All right. So the statement here was WWE and its board of directors jointly released the following statement today. Independent directors continue review of alleged executive misconduct. Stephanie McMahon named interim CEO and interim chairwoman. WWE and the board of directors today announced that a special committee of the board is conducting an investigation into alleged misconduct by its chairman and CEO Vincent McMahon and John Laurinaitis, head of talent relations, and that effective immediately, McMahon has voluntarily stepped back from his responsibilities as CEO and chairman of the board until the conclusion of the investigation. McMahon will retain his role and responsibilities related to WWE's creative content during this period and remains committed to cooperating with the review underway. The special committee has appointed Stephanie McMahon to serve as interim CEO and interim chairwoman. I have pledged my complete cooperation to the investigation by the special committee, and I will do everything possible to support the investigation. I have also pledged to accept the findings and outcome of the investigation, whatever they are, said Mr. McMahon. I love this company and committed to working with the independent directors to strengthen our culture and our company. It's extremely important to me to have a safe and collaborative workspace. I have committed to doing everything in my power to help the special committee to complete its work, including marshaling the cooperation of the entire company to assist in the completion of the investigation and to implement its findings, said Ms. McMahon. WWE and its board of directors take all allegations of misconduct very seriously. The independent directors of the board engage independent legal counsel to assist them with independent review. In addition, the special committee and WWE will work with an independent third party to conduct a comprehensive review of the company's compliance program, HR function, and overall culture. The company and the board do not expect to have further comment until the investigation is concluded.
Yes. So Stephanie McMahon just about a month, almost a month, right? After she tweeted this on May 19th that she was taking a leave of absence from the majority of her responsibilities to focus on her family. She's back, and she's now, at least officially, the interim CEO, the interim chairwoman of the board, roles that Vince McMahon held. Vince McMahon is still the head of creative. He is still running television. And just after, what is the very end of that statement say? The company and board, you do not expect to have any further comments until the investigation is concluded. Well, 2 hours later, one sentence press release comes out from WWE. What does it say, Chris Cole?
It says that WWE today announced that Mr. McMahon will appear on SmackDown tonight at 8 p.m. live on Fox.
Yeah. And he does. So I think it's really important, and as I've argued in an article on Wrestlenomics.com, I think it's really important that we understand that Vince is still the head of creative, and yes, he's, at least in name, no longer at this moment the CEO and chairman of the board, but my impression is that much of what he has done in this company, increasingly towards the present, has been involving his role as the head of creative, and more of his traditional roles as a corporate officer have been increasingly delegated to Nick Khan and others. But yeah, Jesse, any thoughts about day 2 of this story?
Well, so
really
it'd be interesting hearing if you've heard anything differently, Brandon, but I want to go back to the Stephanie thing for a second. So Stephanie announces her leave of absence, and there was all this speculation about why she was, was she being fired? Was it, was it something to do with Triple H? What really happened, right? And WWE releases this they have this Business Insider story where a source from WWE makes the case that Stephanie was under-delivering with her sponsorship, under-delivered on sponsorship goals and wasn't particularly effective at her job. And this is Vince, kind of getting rid of her. Something that was disputed by news outlets that cover pro wrestling, as you mentioned. I thought in the Observer on this week, Dave reported that the whole leak, the idea that someone from WWE would talk to Business Insider and kind of bury Stephanie, was done strategically, because from a public perception standpoint, WWE did not want to see the daughter of the CEO and someone who has been pretty publicly groomed as like the next face of the company. They didn't like the idea of that person stepping away from their duties. They thought it would be a negative image. So they plant this story that makes it seem like we're getting rid of Stephanie, and that's a positive step, as opposed to a negative step being that she's quitting because she doesn't work for a terrible company. She doesn't want to work for the company, and the company is terrible. And so that's what Dave reported, that they did this on purpose. Basically, they leaked this information that they were firing Stephanie essentially for being bad, and that people should be positive about this move as opposed to questioning why Stephanie is leaving the company. So they do that. And then a week later, Stephanie is the CEO of the company and is now running the company. And so this person that you just publicly buried essentially as a strategic goal to try to get people to make it seem like your company is doing a good thing, 1 week later, you now have to turn around and say, oh, this person that we just kind of said is bad at her job is now running the company and also is potentially going to be handling the company during a massive PR crisis. But please have faith in us. And I just found that to be so fascinating. I don't know if you heard anything differently than what Dave reported, in the sense of that this was not like the Business Insider story was not like a strategic play by WWE. But I found that completely fascinating. They attempted to shift the narrative by leaking out essentially a false narrative of how people saw Stephanie in the company, and 1 week later are now counting on people to have faith in Stephanie as a leader for this company.
So when it comes to the Business Insider article, and we can let's toss those excerpts. These are kind of the substantive excerpts from the Business Insider article, which read, this is from Claire Atkinson is the byline. Stephanie is being replaced in her corporate role as part of a shakeup executed by her father, Vince McMahon. And then the insider, the company, a person attributed as the company insider, says, "We weren't seeing that growth. When someone is moved out of the company, it's usually the result of something not working. We took stronger control of that a few months ago." So there's an executive who was hired by Stephanie, Claudine Lillian. She was there for, I think, about 6 months. And she was removed by Vince McMahon, I was told. As far as like what causes these quotes to end up in Business Insider, I don't know if it's I wouldn't describe it as the company decided they wanted to do something, or I would think it's more so a faction within the company, or maybe one person within the company wanted to wanted to make it public that, at least make the message public that it wasn't really her stepping away. It was because of her performance. Because there must be, this would be my speculation, that there must be some opposing factions here. One of those factions involving Stephanie, and we can speculate about who's in the opposite faction, or it's probably not even as clear cut as that. But I've been told that Stephanie and Kevin Dunn don't get along, and I'm not the only person who's heard that. And Stephanie fired Bruce Pritchard in 2008. I doubt there's great feelings between Stephanie and Bruce Pritchard, who's now back in WWE and in an important role in creative. So there's definitely executives in WWE who are vying for power. I think back to one thing, Jesse, you said on this program, several weeks back, when we were just talking about what would WWE be like in a state where there is no Vince McMahon around, and that the knives would be out. And then there's a lot of people who, if Vince is going to truly fall from power here, maybe he is. He seems to be in jeopardy, at least. That's going to leave a huge vacuum of power, and a lot of people probably want to assume that vacancy. So that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my impression of it.
Go ahead. I was going to say, when you mentioned the executive history, right? Who was heavily involved with bringing in Mark Carrano to kind of replace Laurinaitis? Mark Carrano and Keenan Seaman in those roles,
I don't know. Maybe that's, I would have to look at how when they showed up and the timing of that. You have any do you have any idea though?
I feel like there might have been a Stephanie move to go into that direction.
Okay. Jesse, you were going to say?
Just the succession plan for WWE has always been kind of up in the air, especially with kind of Paul Levesque's scaling back of responsibilities. Some related to his health, some related to perhaps poor performance. The interesting thing to me is, this is all under the assumption right now, at least, that Stephanie is actually the CEO and actually the person kind of in power. I think we're probably all a little bit skeptical that Vince isn't just still kind of running the company, and this is a optics move. In fact, that's been reported by a couple people. So I still think Stephanie's role in the company is relatively unclear. I said this on the show when she was, she stepped down. How the amount of authority that Stephanie McMahon exhibits within the company, to me, is rather mysterious. She seems mostly used as a public person that does interviews and is presented as a leading figure in the company, and can appear in 30 most powerful women in sports listicles and those kind of things. But her actual role or actual authority within the company over the last few years, to me is still relatively unknown.
And I want to reference a Fightful report as well, as we're still in the Friday timeline. About the middle of the day, SmackDown has not happened yet, but Fightful has talked to a number of W talent about their impression of the situation at that point. Why don't you tell us about that, Gullo?
As long as Vince McMahon still has creative duties, nothing can change. What could possibly be different? If he asked something of Stephanie as interim CEO, is she going to say no? One wrestler said. Another quote, I imagine it won't change much, but I love Steph, so that's good, said another top talent. I imagine Vince keeps his position in creative, and once the investigation is over, he'll take back over if he can. And the last part here, another talent from a creative aspect, I hope that things change, but I doubt they will. From a business aspect, I'm also hoping that things change, but I also doubt they will. Really, the only thing I think that will actually change is Johnny will be fired, which will be nice. Stephanie is great, but I doubt she's going to suddenly be on board with healthcare and guaranteed contracts.
Yeah, and those sound like correct reads to me. And those people who Sean Ross Sapp talked to would be in a better position to know. And then during the day, as SmackDown airtime is approaching, PW Insider reports on the atmosphere backstage in Minneapolis.
Despite the last several days, McMahon was joking around during the production meeting before the taping and wasn't selling anything at all. Described PW Insider by multiple sources as being in a great mood. We're told there was nothing addressed or discussed by McMahon in regards to allegations thus far today at the tapings. There have been whispers among some of the company that he would address the troops, but as of 4 p.m. this afternoon, that has not happened.
So as this SmackDown episode is approaching airtime, I had done like 3 interviews by this time with people from various podcasts and radio shows and things like that, and we all it was announced that morning that Vince was going to be on SmackDown, and everyone's speculating about what's going to happen. Is he's going to address the allegations? I was speculating it could be that, it could be maybe there's going to be some sort of comedic slapstick writing off of Vince McMahon. Jesse, did you have any thoughts about what to expect?
I was horrified by it just because I thought it was Vince exploiting sexual misconduct allegations and a chance to pop ratings. And I thought that it was a really bad look for the professional wrestling industry. And we can get into maybe the mainstream coverage of the situation later and how that relates to it. I thought I didn't know what to expect. I didn't watch it live, but I imagined that there was a lot of Jerry McDevitt pleading on asking Vince what he was going to do. But when it happened, to me, in going with the PWI report, it seemed like to me like he just wanted the ego boost of going backstage and going out in front of the crowd and getting cheered. It hasn't been an awesome week for Vince. Obviously, there's the Oliver Luck case, which is now going to trial, and that's not like an awesome thing for Vince either, in addition to these allegations. So I think he just wanted to go out in the public and get cheered, which wrestling fans were happy to oblige.
Yeah, and just for background, for anybody who doesn't know, the Oliver Luck case is a lawsuit between the former commissioner of the XFL during the relaunch, who claims that he was wrongly terminated, and it's a lawsuit that's been ongoing for probably for just after that version of the XFL folded in 2020, and as Jesse said, it's going to trial soon. So there's that, and so Vince does appear on SmackDown, and what we have on the screen for people watching on YouTube, the entirety of his comments. Nobody knew if he was going to start the show, if he was going to be in the main event segment or what. But the entirety of his comments, I guess I'll read them, are this. It is a privilege. First of all, we should probably, and we don't have a clip to play here, but we should probably describe the atmosphere of what happened there. His wrestling tends to be this sort of Pavlovian experience for an audience, in that you've spent, there's been upwards of 20 years of fans learning that when the No Chance in Hell theme music plays, everyone erupts. I heard it's hard to read W crowd reactions, at this point to me, because they use the fake crowd noise, and there were definitely cheers. I heard some people describe it as mixed. That sounds right to me. Maybe there were some boos, but it was, if I weren't looking for boos, I don't know if I would notice them. So Vince gets in the ring and he says, "It is a privilege, as always, to stand before you tonight, the W Universe. Especially a privilege to stand in this ring in Minnesota." He gets a cheap pop. "I'm here simply to remind you of the 4 words we saw in what we call the W signature. Those 4 words are then, now, forever, and the most important word is together. Welcome to SmackDown." And he tosses the microphone away, walks out of the ring. By the way, of course, he was strutting throughout his entrance, slapping hands with the audience. Like, there's no doubt he's being presented as a babyface. You can even notice that the director is putting the camera on people who are cheering Vince in his entrance and things like that. This is clearly a presentation that, among other things, perhaps, is presenting Vince as a good guy here. There's no illusion There's no commentary narrating this about what's happening in the rest of the world here. This is no allusion to the news story. Who knows what percentage of the crowd is aware of the story or not aware of the story, but if you weren't aware of it, this is just an innocuous welcome to SmackDown message from Vince for some reason. I don't know why. But if you do know about it, it's a pretty bizarre appearance, and I was shocked that this was the entirety of it, but maybe in another sense not. Yes.
It was also reported before he appeared that this would be in character. It's Mr. McMahon. It is not Vince out of character. Now, I think, but in this day and age, the differences between Vince McMahon, the character on TV, and Vince McMahon, the I guess currently not chairman of the company, but Vince McMahon, the chairman and CEO of WWE, there's not really any difference. He wasn't feuding with anyone, so like he comes out, does it really matter if he's the character owner of the company or the real owner of the company? If he's just going to say this didn't come across like an in character promo though, despite that It was supposed to be in character.
We do have a super chat related to this from Sean Fowl. He goes, do you think Vince appeared on SmackDown to show TV executives the fans cheering him to save face rather than letting social media decide his fate?
I think social media will not decide his fate. I think it was done to, I think it's something that Vince is likely to approve. Who knows who pitched it or whose idea it was, or certainly Vince approved of it. But I think sir, I think I tend to agree with what Jesse said earlier, that it sort of comforts his ego to get out there and get a positive reaction. And certainly you could position that segment in a situation where it would be likely to get a positive reaction. You play his theme music, you have him go out there and use the cheap pop line of "It's great to be here in Minnesota." It's a move that, hey, we can go out here and this very day, and despite all these allegations against me, I can still come out here and get a positive reaction from my audience. And Vince, throughout the years, through his various scandals, has often positioned himself as a victim, whether it was in the face of criticism from a columnist like Phil Mushnick, or from being indicted by the federal government. He has often positioned himself as somebody who's being treated unfairly, and maybe there's this groundswell of people behind him who are really supporting him. Stand up for WWE, things like that. So, yeah.
I think there is plenty of support for him on social media, so I wouldn't necessarily social media deciding his fate is an inherently negative thing for him to do. As Brandon said, read about any dictator in history. When they were feeling a little low, they often had rallies and went out to talk to the people and got their supporters, and they had that ego boost. Chairman Mao liked to do that a lot. So Vince is, that kind of personality where he's like, I've been taking a beating. Let me go out there. Let me get cheered. Let me feel like these people are all behind me, because I have this natural persecution complex where I think all of these people are against me and I have done nothing wrong.
I think Vince has a friend who acts similarly too. So that's what happens on SmackDown. And we have the fast affiliate rating for SmackDown. So this is not the final rating. The final rating will come out on Monday. But we do have fast affiliates, which usually are pretty strongly correlated by a difference of about 5.5%. So if I apply that formula, we've got a rating for SmackDown of a total viewership for SmackDown of about 2.4 million viewers. Based on that's my projection based on the fast affiliate number. So if SmackDown averaged throughout the entire program 2.4 million viewers, this would be the most watched SmackDown since at least September. The MSG September 10th SmackDown had a high viewership. But if it is, say it's exactly 2.4 million viewers, this would be the most watched SmackDown since the December 25th Christmas Day SmackDown, which had an NFL lead-in, which gave it an enormous audience to begin with. It ended up averaging 3.3 million viewers on Christmas 2020. That's an exceptional situation. So if we exclude that one, we have to go back to the very first No crowd show for SmackDown in the COVID era. So that's March 20th, 2020, when SmackDown actually did over 2.5 million viewers. So this looks like it's going to be the most watched SmackDown in a long time when the final rating comes out on Monday. And surprisingly, according to the Fast affiliates, which anybody can look at, by the way, on SpoilerTV.com reports them, the Fast affiliates show that Hour 2, in fact, was more highly viewed than Hour 1. If we didn't make it clear earlier, Vince came out at the very beginning of SmackDown. His segment lasted about 2 minutes. I was watching it live, and I figured there's got to be massive tune-out happening right now after that segment ended. People were, I heard people talking throughout the day about how they were going to watch SmackDown for the first time in years, and they tuned in, and they saw the Vince McMahon segment that they were all waiting for, and there must have been massive tune-out. But lo and behold, the second hour was more highly viewed than the first hour. I hope to get quarter hours on Monday as well, and we'll look into this more deeply. Now, there was a Roman Reigns versus Matt Riddle match that was a title match, and one of the bigger matches in SmackDown in some time. YouTube clips have the Vince segment at the third most, just over 1 million views as of 9 o'clock this morning. Brock Lesnar came back at the end of the show, and that's got nearly 3 million views at this moment. And the highlights of Riddle and Roman Reigns over 1.2 million views, so more than the Vince clip as well. Comments, by the way, the comments for the Vince clip are disabled, whereas that's not the case for most any other W YouTube video. So
YouTube. Just looking at those YouTube numbers, the two things that stand out to me, the first being that, so the Vince McMahon promo, if you were following on, like I didn't watch live, but I was checked in on just social media real quick, kind of after it happened, just to see what it was. And all of the reports on Twitter or if you're on Reddit or Facebook or whatever, were that like you don't need to watch this Vince promo because this is all he said, and it can be summarized in a quarter of a second. And so in some ways that maybe prevents people from then seeking out the clip on YouTube.
it wasn't very newsworthy.
Right. And the second thing I think would be interesting is that obviously WWE has in the YouTube on WWE obviously has a large following in other countries, most particularly India. And do those fans care as much about the Vince McMahon promo and the Vince McMahon allegations as much as they would care about something like Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, or something that's maybe a little bit more attainable to fans who are not reading, Western news sites all day?
Sure. And so my understanding of the situation with W's partner Sony in India, that I think this is the case for Raw and SmackDown, is that content is windowed. So I don't think if you're in India, you can see those clips like within the first day. But after that, I think you can. Or maybe they pick and choose certain segments. But nonetheless, I mean, there's still the point to be made about maybe this was just more of a U.S. and English-speaking market story, and maybe not so much in other markets, which probably over-index in YouTube activity for WWE. So that's what happened there, and that is the bulk of the story and the facts that we have to present here. So the rest we can analyze what's happening here. I have on the screen here for people watching on YouTube just a selection of mainstream media highlights, or mainstream media headlines from places like ESPN, Bloomberg, Fox Business, LA Times, Bleacher Report, ESPN, CNBC, CNN. We'll talk about the CNN segments as well. We can. A lot of focus on, I think people, reporters in mainstream media saw the press release, obviously, that Vince McMahon is no longer the CEO and chairman, and that's basically what they wrote their headlines on. Yes, they do mention somewhere in the article that he's still the head of creative, but that is the big takeaway for me. That's as big of a takeaway for me as him no longer being the CEO and chairman, is that he's still being the head of creative. And I think that was underemphasized throughout mainstream media on Friday. Any thoughts on that, Jesse or Gullo?
Well, I mean, you look at the headlines, right? And this is a scandalous story. Like Vince McMahon was having sex with a subordinate and then paid her off as part of a settlement, and now he's being investigated for it. But there's the sexy angle aspect of it, I think, captures the public's imagination in a way that other maybe negative WWE stories don't. There's understanding the nuance of the Saudi Arabia deal and why that would be problematic is not as easy to craft a headline as around as Vince McMahon, pays hush money for after sexual misconduct probe. And I think that plays a role in just more attention being played to it and making sure that all of these various mainstream news outlets get something out of it. My company was writing several stories throughout the day on the Vince McMahon situation.
So from the CNN video you sent me, Brandon, when they covered it, it wasn't long, and it for lack of a better word, it was just that short kind of like quib that you put at the end of a program. Oh, by the way, this is happening. Like, it didn't seem like there was a serious investigation journalist aspect from CNN. It's just like, hey, I guess we have to cover this. Can you believe Vince McMahon, this character and all that? But it didn't come off as this like, hey, this is something that's serious and we're going to further go into it. And we're going to have an analyst on here and have a long conversation piece. Like, it seemed like, hey,
it's about 2.5 minutes. They had Dave Meltzer on.
But those networks, they take one topic and turn it into 30, 60, 90 minutes of programming at a time.
Right. And to balance this, they had a lot to report about Ukraine and U.S. politics that day, as always. But yeah, it was towards the end of the program. It was about 2.5 minutes. It was spliced with clips of things like, Vince McMahon at WrestleMania getting his head shaved by Donald Trump, tearing his tank top away from his body, and all these sort of goofy highlights, which I think undermine the seriousness of the situation, which I wrote about yesterday. As far as I think a lot of the way that the mainstream media presents stories about wrestling, even when they're very serious stories, mainstream media is so fixated on the fact that pro wrestling is this weird, predetermined pseudo sport. We have to inundate it with puns and with the zany personality of Vince McMahon. Even when we're talking about abuse of power, and even when we're talking about sexual misconduct, we have to, focus on the pun that Jake Tapper uses. This was a Jake Tapper segment. The pun that he uses about from in the ring to on the ropes. That I would have thought, compared to all of the other scandals in WWE's history that have also gotten mainstream coverage, that maybe more would have changed between then and now, but it hasn't. Jesse, what are your thoughts on the CNN segment or any of this mainstream?
So I read your article on it, Brandon, and I think everyone should read it, just because I think a lot of good points are made about mainstream media's handling of this kind of situation and kind of how the overriding aspect of, well, isn't it fake, is still has a grip on the public's perception of pro wrestling and mainstream media's ability to cover pro wrestling. However, I did feel like the way CNN covered it, and upon further thinking, I feel like I did learn something about this, which is I am of the belief that because the nature of pro wrestling, it's these fake competitive sport attempting to pass itself off as real competition. And because everyone knows that's the number one thing people know about pro wrestling is that it's fake. That obscures real life stories and real life drama and real life tragedy in a way that it does not for other industries, and that hurts the reporting on the company and the reporting on the industry. Right? It's wrestling is fake, so this guy died. It's fake. Who cares? That kind of attitude takes hold. But upon seeing the CNN story, I started to think about something else, which is not necessarily that wrestling is fake and therefore we're not going to report on this too seriously. It's more like Vince McMahon, who is professional wrestling for a lot of people, and especially people on the outside. Whatever Vince McMahon does, that is what the professional wrestling industry is doing. Vince has cultivated a public image of himself as being this wacky character who is at the center of this very lewd, very insensitive product. And by doing so, Vince has established himself as some sort of carnival freak who, no matter what they do, will always just be dismissed and denied as just this wacky guy who does crazy things. And that this sexual misconduct allegation and this very serious investigation into WWE, we're going to dismiss it, not necessarily because it's associated with this fake product, but because Vince McMahon is this incredibly crazy figure that everything he does is so crazy and wacky that we can't really take anything that seriously about him. The attitude of Vince McMahon, the sideshow freak, obscures the ability to actually cover what's really happening. Everything is just dismissed as a pattern of predictable Vince McMahon behavior. That's why this story was, this kind of very serious story. Vince McMahon slept with, was having a sexual relationship with a subordinate and $3 million NDA and all of this stuff is also spliced in with footage of Vince McMahon ripping off of his shirt and Vince McMahon getting his head shaved by Donald Trump and all these in-character moments on WWE programming that show Vince McMahon just being a crazy, wacky guy. And that this is just another crazy, wacky story. And you don't really have to take it that seriously because look how crazy and nutty this guy is. Isn't that funny? Isn't that entertaining? And I think even, Jake Tapper respond at the end of the show, at the end of the segment, and the reporter says, and Vince McMahon will be in the ring tonight to address the WWE fans. And Jake Tapper kind of rolls his eyes and says, of course he is. And that was kind of funny because it showed, Jake Tapper is his views on pro wrestling and his views on Vince McMahon are very obscure, are very dismissive. But it kind of does show the kind of general attitude is like, oh, I watched that news and I was like, I'm horrified that Vince is going into the ring. This is terrible. He's exploiting this, and this is a terrible thing for pro wrestling. Jake Tapper is like, yeah, well, that's for the record, that's par for the course for Vince. That's something that we all know he would do. So I found it very interesting the way the mainstream covered all of this, and it does show that as hard as Vince has tried to shed the image of him as carnival, barker who's organizing this illegitimate form of entertainment, and as hard as he's tried to gain sponsorships, and as hard as he's trying to cultivate the image that WWE is this major entertainment brand, and as much as Nick Khan wants to say we're like Disney, we're going to be like Marvel, at the end of the day, the mainstream media just sees this as a total freak show that they don't take seriously. And as hard as they've tried and all those efforts that they've made, they've all been for naught, because at the end of the day, the circus is still Vince McMahon, and that nothing has changed despite the last 20 years of effort to change that.
Yeah, I think that articulates something that maybe vaguely in a cloud passed through my mind watching the CNN segment, is that Vince has benefited. Now it's not a calculation in all likelihood. I'm sure he didn't calculate in 2007 when he booked the Trump versus McMahon billionaire versus billionaire match that this would play out this way, but that there's no shortage of B-roll, at least video. We're looking at a bunch of screenshots of mainstream headlines from online news publications, and most of those have stock images. There's this really common one where he's standing up on the stage when the W Network is being introduced, and there's other photos from things like press conferences that he's done over the years. Most of them are quite old, but TV is a televisual medium, and the extent to which people watch video clips, I think that's something that has a big effect on people. And it's not just about the words that are said, that are narrated in the segment, and it's not just about the words that are written in the articles, but it's about the images that people see too. And again, I don't think it's calculated, but it ends up being to Vince's benefit that there are all these ridiculous and zany clips that what just happens to be in the B-roll, at least in the library at CNN, for them to play over these segments, is stuff that makes the story look ridiculous, or I think undermines the seriousness of it. I guess now is as good a time as any to go through some of the arguments that I was making in the article that's posted yesterday. In that, I'm very happy to be a guest on podcasts and talk shows and things like that to talk about this subject. I think it's ironic that and a lot of other people in wrestling media have been asked to do that in the last few days as well. And I think it's ironic that we are asked to give some understanding into how this is going to play out. What's going to happen next? What do we need to be watching for next? Which is an understandable enough question. But what happens next for Vince McMahon and for the WWE? While, yes, the board of directors will make some decision about what the outcome of their investigation is. Maybe they'll fire Vince, maybe they won't. But the degree to which they feel pressured to, the degree to which they feel comfortable just giving Vince, a light slap on the wrist and saying, okay, don't do this again, but now you're CEO and chairman again, which I don't wholly believe he's not right now in all practical sense. But the degree to which the board feels comfortable not doing much of anything, or the degree to which they feel more urged to remove him permanently if they see fit, if there's evidence for that, that's going to be determined by the degree to which there's public pressure and there's public understanding of the story and there's public information about this story and whatever else is in Vince's past that may be making WWE a toxic work environment. That's up to the mainstream media. That's up to the Wall Street Journal to follow up on this story and to continue doing stories and to continue finding out what the truth is. That's up to other mainstream publications, including who knows what, the New York Post, New York Times, probably not the New York Post, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and publications like that. Certainly, there are publications that might be incentivized to protect Vince as well. Maybe publications that sometimes do cover WWE who don't want to upset WWE. But I would hope that there are at least some that have more of an incentive to tell the truth about this. I think wrestling media certainly plays a role, and I hope we're doing our part here today in talking about this story and helping people understand what the details of this story are. We'll continue to do that. But we have a limited reach. Certainly, we're limited at least to wrestling fans, right? But wrestling media is also positioned as, we're sort of throughout the wrestling fan base and throughout people who work in wrestling, whether it's the most competent publication, pick your favorite one, or the least competent publication, pick your least favorite one. We're all sort of grouped together as the dirt sheets, as these weird sort of publications that also can't really be taken seriously, and some of them for good reason. So we're really limited in how seriously we're taken. And Vince's culture has always been to take fan sentiment or wrestling media sentiment and ignore it and dismiss it as part of the vocal minority. And that's just the dirt sheets. You can think back to something that Jerry McDevitt said in some legal proceeding, where he referred to, I think, the Observer as something. It's basically like the National Enquirer for our business, and that these publications can't be taken seriously, and that people who work in wrestling media are just people who spend the day going through details, searching for something to make a news story out of. So there's
wrestling fans can't read, so these are these pulpy newsletters that have no real value because wrestling fans are not intellectually capable enough to read proper media coverage, which I think is an implication for that kind of rhetoric, right? Which is that wrestling fans don't care about these kind of things there, so they only are interested. The perception of wrestling fans is that they're dumb. So what are dumb people interested in? Like salacious rumors, like people who would read the National Enquirer, as opposed, and it all kind of plays into the general perception of wrestling fans, right?
Yeah. So yes, Gullo.
I'm going to say, can it be fair to say, and I think kind of back to the mainstream media point, that if any other CEO or chairman or chairwoman steps down, this is maybe not necessarily a bigger story, but a much covered differently story. Like, that makes any sense. Like, you know, you can just pull any random publicly traded company out, and I think it's just a different context.
Jesse?
I mean, definitely, for sure. I think, well, maybe not any other. I'm sure there are other industries that maybe have like a public perception the way that pro wrestling has. Like, I don't know if there's like a well-known like pornographic executive, but like if it was that kind of industry, like an industry that basically the general public doesn't respect in a way that pro wrestling also holds a similar position. But if we were to compare it to, say, like a Roger Goodell or Adam Silver or Gary Bettman, like, you know, these executives of major pro sports leagues, which is probably the closest comparison to Vince in a lot of ways, or perhaps a big Hollywood executive, the accusations would be taken much more seriously. And I think, you know, when they're talking about this Vince allegations on CNN, and they're talking about this, you know, very real life allegations, yet they're playing all of this stuff from Vince McMahon, the character. They're showing him get his head shaved by Donald Trump. They're showing him, you know, ripping off his shirt and fighting Steve Austin. If, for say, you know, there was a very serious story about Vin Diesel, I don't know if they'd be showing B-roll of like Vin Diesel, you know, in Fast and the Furious, and Vin Diesel like jumping out of an exploding car. In addition to talking about him, I feel like they would show him like on the red carpet, or him doing an interview, or like Vin Diesel the person, and not Vin Diesel the actor who's playing this role on this program. I think that's a big distinction.
I think it's, you know, along the lines of like if Jim Carrey were embroiled in some scandal, and now we're showing clips of like Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, or something like that. But I think it's a good point, Jesse, you make about like if this was a commissioner of a sports league, and I think the NHL is, you know, when we've made the TV rights calculations, and I've compared wrestling TV rights value to the NHL. Part of the reason why I do that is because the viewership is in some ways comparable, and WWE's viewership is consistently higher than the NHL's viewership, I guess, with the exception of probably the Stanley Cup that's happening right now. But for the most part, I mean, WWE viewership blows away what the regular season does on TNT, and I think that determines the degree to which it's like it's in the public interest, right? Or that the public would care about the story. I would think, you know, you think about, well, is this something that people watch? Is this something that people know about? And WWE, in some ways, I don't know if popular is a vague term, but WWE in a lot of ways is very comparable to the NHL in terms of at least viewership. And
I would argue that the public, like the general public, probably knows Vince McMahon more than the general public knows Gary Bettman. I don't know if that's, maybe that's not 100% true, but it would feel like at least the name Vince McMahon would have more SEO value than Gary Bettman. Perhaps I'm wrong.
Yeah, we can verify that later with Google Trends. But yeah, unless we have anything else to add about the wrestling media story, I guess we can move to just to review what the stock price is doing right now. Friday was a pretty hard day for the stock, where the stock was down by a few percent while the indexes actually were up a bit. The stock market has been terrible lately, as we are careening towards a bear market. But the stock overall, I mean, in the 5-day measure, which is what we've got on the screen right now, the stock is basically where it was at the beginning of the week on Monday. It's basically on Friday where it was on Monday. The stock is at $62.50. I don't have it in front of me. That probably puts the market capital of WWE just under $4 billion. So there was some volatility on Friday when this news came out that Vince is stepping down as CEO and chairman. By the way, staying on as head of creative. And it's always been something that we've talked about on Wrestlenomics is what will happen the day that, you know, Vince McMahon suddenly passes away. The stock price will be adversely affected, and it was 3%. It was down 3% on a better day for the stock market. So I don't know, and it's an interim thing. It's not necessarily permanent thing that he's not going to be at least officially running the company. So, or maybe a lot of shareholders just view it the way I do, in that it's that they're skeptical that there's real change happening here. So, stock price seems to be doing okay. The volume on Wednesday was enormous before the Wall Street Journal came out. We mentioned this on Wednesday in our breaking news update, but the volume on Wall Street for W stock, there were over 2 million shares on Wednesday before the Wall Street Journal, before this was a story. 2 million shares changed hands. Now, Morgan Stanley, Ben Swinburne, who's the analyst from Morgan Stanley, came out with a report raising W stock target, and that probably had a lot to do with why a lot of shares changed hands. Did other people know about this? I don't know. I think it's worth questioning. But a lot of shares changed hands. More volume on this stock than since July 2021. Guggenheim also came out with a report the following day, so that may have been playing into raising their stock price target as well. Basically, raising the price target, if people don't understand, just means that, hey, what I thought this stock would get to within a year, I think it's going to get to an even higher price, is basically what that means. So that would theoretically, if all other things were equal, would encourage people to buy the stock. So that's what's happening. A lot of volume still in the rest of the week, because there's pretty big news here that's pretty relevant to the stock price. People sometimes ask questions as if W's creative can affect the stock price. It almost never does, and it doesn't work in the way that wrestling fans sometimes think it does. It has much more to do with what's happening, at least in W's case, what's happening with the value and with the potential value, and what stockholders believe is the potential value of their TV rights fees. Or in this case, and in the case of when Barros and Wilson were suddenly fired in January 2020, it has to do with what's happening with management. So that's what's happening there.
I also think there's a public kind of relationship or a disconnect between wrestling fans, many of whom would see Vince McMahon no longer being the head of creative and no longer really being in charge of the company as a positive sign for the company. That attitude is not bared out amongst Wall Street analysts or other people within the stock market, which is that the general perception, it tends to be Vince McMahon is the optimal person to be running this company, and anyone else running it would not do as good of a job. And I think wrestling fans sometimes have a hard time with that concept, that it's not always the concept is not necessarily what we think, but the reality of it is Vince McMahon is the right person to be in charge for basically as long as he has been, right, in Wall Street's eyes. There's been instances where, right, where he did the fake death angle, right, and the stock plummeted because people thought that he actually died, or there was the angle where Donald Trump purchased Raw, and people immediately were like, "Oh, Vince doesn't run Raw anymore. Sell the stock." So as much as wrestling fans maybe argue on behalf that Vince no longer being in charge of creative would be a positive thing for the company, and the company would experience growth after that, that has never really been bared out in the stock price.
Yeah, I would almost wonder if there's maybe even going that far back when those incidents happened. So 2007 would be the Vince death angle. 2007 would also be the Trump angle, right? I almost wonder if there's literally just algorithms that if there's a news article that says Vince dies or Vince sells, that they're programmed to start selling some stock or something like that. But anyway, yeah, I am one of those people who said that I don't think that the day that Vince isn't in charge of creative, at least, I think W will be. I'm less confident these days, but W could be better off because their content might improve, and I think the biggest obstacle to W's content improving, and therefore its popularity and its consumer metrics and consumer sales improving, is Vince McMahon being an obstacle in creative. So that's not changing. But when it does, I think W could be better off. But then again, if it ends up being, I don't know, people like Bruce Pritchard involved, maybe it doesn't get much better. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that.
I just, we talked about like a sale, right? Like if they sold to Comcast, which I know we're going to allude to in a little bit, and Vince would still be in charge of probably creative. I can't see him stepping down from that at all. So I cannot fathom a world where Vince is in charge of creative. I just can't do it, because until the day he dies.
Yeah, to me, it would have to come from like this story, and that eventually Vince McMahon would have to become so toxic. His brand, he would have to become so toxic that he can't be associated with the company in any way and going any further. If this is I use the term full Weinstein situation, where there's just all of these allegations that go out there, he becomes this total social pariah, even more so than he already is. That's the only way I see him kind of losing creative control over the company, because at the end of the day, the WWE board of directors probably want Vince in that role. They trust him the most. Wall Street trusts him the most. So there's not that big of an incentive for them to want to get rid of him, as much as wrestling fans might argue that there should be. And I'm a firm believer in the total chaos theory of once Vince goes, then it's going to be like just a ridiculous time with a million people trying to gain power, and that no one will have the authority to kind of stop them. And it will be this 2000s WCW level disaster where there's like a new person in charge every week.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the rumblings of that right now in terms of what happened in that Business Insider article. Why did Stephanie really take a temporary leave of absence? How did the Wall Street Journal learn what it learned about the board's investigation? This seems to be rumblings of people who are vying for power in a post Vince world. But whether that's if when he passes away, or whether that's when he's just removed from power for some other reason.
When it comes to that investigation,
yes.
does the independent board of directors have to even tell the executives at a certain point? Is there like a...
Don't know. I would tend to believe that members of the board of directors, executive members, and independent members, certainly independent members, knew about this investigation by April when they started it.
Because minus Nick Khan, all the executives are family, or like so. I mean,
yes.
So yeah.
Yes, but I don't think that necessarily means that they're not willing to stab each other in the back, figuratively speaking. So,
why would Triple H want to do that, Brandon?
Well, I'm sure Paul Levesque and Vince, they have a lot of love for each other. I'm sure they, I know Triple H gave Vince that great T-Rex head, a T-Rex skull that's in Vince's office. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are some competitive feelings between Paul Levesque and Vince, to say the least, or Stephanie for that matter. I just want to touch on too, Jerry McDevitt is Vince's lawyer. Jerry McDevitt is the company's lawyer. We may end up, and if the worst happens for Vince and he's removed permanently, there's probably going to be litigation about that, and or at least there's what's happening right now is, at least in the Wall Street Journal report, we've got Jerry McDevitt making statements to the Wall Street Journal in defense of Vince. Jerry McDevitt is defending Vince, and he's defending the company, and now it looks like the company, that is the board, and Vince McMahon, they're going to have competing interests. And if there wasn't already, we're seeing a conflict of interest, I think, for Jerry McDevitt, who is not a WWE lawyer. He's not an employee of WWE. He is, as this caption here from Dark Side of the Ring says, a partner at a law firm called K&L Gates in Pittsburgh. And he's defended WWE and Vince McMahon through numerous litigation, numerous legal events, going back to 1987. The Jim the Anvil Neidhart causing trouble on an airplane, I think, is where that all starts. And Jerry McDevitt, I get the impression from this episode of Dark Side of the Ring, where he's interviewed and he talks about how strong his relationship is with Vince. I believe that Jerry McDevitt, if he has to pick between the company and Vince, that he'll pick Vince. I think that raises some questions about what Jerry McDevitt's involvement will be in ongoing litigation involving the company that he's involved in, including the MLW lawsuit, where he and a number of other lawyers from K&L Gates are the names that appear in the signature blocks there. And it's not clear to me whether he would continue to participate in those ongoing lawsuits, or whether he would have to recuse himself. So we'll see. That's something to keep in mind too. And that McDivitt is defending the company, and he's defending Vince, and there may be some conflicts of interest there. So I want to talk about Nick Khan here, who has, at least in our little wrestling online culture, has really become a meme. And I'm not sure that that's helpful, but you've got images that are popular and amusing, including this sort of image from the Mortal Kombat. That's what this is from, right? The Mortal Kombat test of strength, test your might, where he's climbing the ranks. He has apparently overcome Triple H. Following Stephanie announcing her temporarily taking a leave of absence, he seems to have followed passed by Stephanie, and now it's time to get on to Vince McMahon, and now Vince McMahon is under fire. And we have this image from Griffin made this about Nick Khan is the Godfather. So do we see Nick Khan as, is this all to Nick Khan's benefit? Is this all a Nick Khan calculation? That did he back in 2020, Nick Khan officially became president and chief revenue officer of WWE in August 2020. He worked with WWE as an agent at CAA, and he helped WWE make their 2018 TV deal. Those are the TV deals that are most important to WWE's business right now, that they're getting paid through Fox and NBC Universal for Raw and SmackDown. Do we see Nick Khan as truly, as some wrestling fans online purport him to be, as this mastermind strategist who sees all the vulnerabilities and weaknesses within WWE management? He sees the ways that he can overtake this one and that department, and finally, it's time for the final boss to be overcome. Is this really how it is, or not? Anyway.
You want to touch on that, Jesse, first?
I mean, to me, Nick, what is Nick Khan's incentive to muscle Vince out? Does Nick Khan own any stock in the company?
Well, yes, and he will. So he has a 5-year employment agreement, and I would have to revisit it. But he's gonna. It's not a significant. I don't know. Well, I don't know what you have in mind here, but he's gonna own quite a bit of stock. And I believe in September he gets a really big stock award that goes into effect. So he will own probably millions of dollars worth of stock. In the grand scheme,
he's not going to own 25% of the company.
He's not going to compete with Vince's control for voting rights, if that's what we're getting at.
So
unless Vince gets rid of a lot of stock.
Yeah. I just if we really think about this, right? In the meme world, right? The joke is that, and maybe the people who don't understand how the company works, the idea is that Nick Khan is eventually gonna muscle all of these McMahons out, and he's gonna be in charge of everything, and he's gonna replace Vince, and this is his ultimate goal, is to replace Vince. And how would that benefit Nick Khan that much? Nick Khan is an employee of the company. His job is to create as much revenue for the company as possible, which will reflect well on him and satisfy the stock market. I think in general, this, as we just talked about, the stock market likes the idea of Vince being in charge. And the stock market probably wouldn't be a huge fan of massive organizational volatility where everyone gets fired all of the time and they're just totally cleaning house of all these recognizable names and these established CEOs and executives. So what is Nick Khan's incentive to the company to do all of this? Is he playing the super long game, which is this perception that Vince is bad at his job, actually, like a lot of wrestlers is bad at his job. We need to get rid of him, replace him with competent creative. And then this company will really take off and we'll all make a lot more money. But even then, there's a nasty road that he would need to take to get there, which would be that the company would have to clean complete house, lose Vince McMahon. And I don't see how that would benefit him at all. Like, I think if you actually think about like how this would benefit Nick Khan, it's kind of absurd to think that he's got this master strategy to eliminate Vince. His goal should be keep Vince around and to continue to build the brand and identity of the company so it can make more money off of television deals and it can make more money off of its sponsorship deals.
I guess you would have to assume that like Vince wants to run the company, or I'm sorry, that Nick wants to run the company for some reason. And
he does. He runs the company now.
Yeah, he runs the business side of things, and really Vince is the creative. Here's the thing with Nick Khan. I don't know Nick Khan personally, but just from my observations, I don't think this is his final stop. I think he has greater aspirations than more wrestling entertainment.
I would tend to agree with that.
And may that be a major network and something like that, yeah.
And I think it's important to note that he has a 5-year employment agreement that I believe would have begun, the clock starts on that in 2020. So that takes him to somewhere in 2025. And that would be after he makes this next round of TV rights deals. Those deals expire in 2024. So that's all coming up next year. So yeah, I would tend to think that maybe, and I think that's a good segue into the next thing, and then maybe part of what he could accomplish here while he's at WWE is maybe he ends up negotiating the sale of WWE. Maybe that's something he's interested in. Maybe that's, and I have always thought until the last couple of weeks that Vince is not interested in selling the company. I'm wavering now, and I've written about that, especially after the announcement that Stephanie was taking the leave of absence, and that seems to remove a really stable successor. So I could see a scenario in which Nick wants to be involved in selling this huge asset, this at least $4 billion asset in WWE, and that's a really big deal to make. Is he that ambitious that he wants to control WWE? I don't know. He did climb the ranks in CAA though, for what that's worth. And maybe there are right now, part of what the political struggle is, that there are these emerging factions within WWE that have competing interests, and one of those competing interests may be a camp that wants to sell and a camp that doesn't want to sell. I would think Stephanie would be in the camp that doesn't want to sell, because if Vince or her family doesn't control those Class B shares that give Vince 80% of the voting rights, that puts her in a position where she is less likely to be the permanent CEO and chairwoman.
I'm right. I mean, I'd be fascinated in a world where the company is sold and Vince McMahon is, retains his position as head of creative, which I think a lot of people would assume would be what would happen. And then now Vince McMahon, for the first time, I think in his life, would be working in a corporate environment where he'd be held accountable by supervisors and a board of directors that he wouldn't control and a company that he wouldn't control. And what is going on in WWE atmospherically at the executive level that would be alarming potentially to a corporate company that would inherit the company. Because I would imagine that's probably not run the same way that, say, Comcast is run.
That's a really good question, because, like, say it's owned by Comcast and Vince is still at a creative, and you hear stories that people say, like, oh, they didn't use me because of this, or I overheard this from head of talent relations and all that. That becomes a much bigger story, I think.
So the most likely buyer for WWE continues to be, and in my view, and I think anybody who's thinking about this in a reasonable way, continues to be at least the one that makes most sense. I don't know if likely is a different word, but the one that makes most sense is Comcast NBC Universal. Why? Because Comcast NBC Universal owns the rights to WWE Raw, Monday Night Raw. They own the rights to what's on Peacock, which is the W Network content and the pay-per-views, premium live events. They own the rights to NXT, Ms. and Mrs. So they're deeply invested in WWE content. Why not just own that content and not have to rent it and lease it? That, though, as we've mentioned before, will be up to another CEO, chairman, controlling shareholder, who is Brian Roberts, who runs Comcast. And I don't know that he's super interested in buying WWE. There was, according to Brandon Ross, several weeks ago, who's a light shed analyst, they believe that Brian Roberts was hesitant about putting WWE on Peacock. That was their belief. Obviously, the Peacock deal has worked out quite well for them. I would say for both WWE and NBC Universal. Say what you want about the success of Peacock at this point, but the WWE content on there has been one of the more positive aspects. So that's gone pretty well. But now, does Comcast want to own a company that is fake pro wrestling, and do they want to deal with maybe some of the other hazards, liabilities that come with owning a pro wrestling company, maybe the difficulties that come with owning a pro wrestling company? And now maybe there's another negative on the table, which is the emergence of this scandal surrounding Vince McMahon and perhaps other executives.
Does Comcast own like any entertainment entities that you would say would be comparable to owning WWE?
That's a good question.
Trying to look that up, and it'd be interesting. Like, how different would a purchase of WWE be for the company that now the company owns this, major entertainment entity, right? They're not going to own the NFL. They're not going to own the English Premier League. They're not going to own the PGA. How would WWE relate to other purchases the company perhaps has made, or how they currently operate, or would it be an entirely new endeavor to kind of run a major facet of your live sports programming, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, I would think it would be something new for NBC Comcast. I guess you said endeavor there. I think the most comparable case of at least another larger parent company owning a sports league or sports organization, live entertainment organization, is Endeavor's ownership of UFC, which they bought several years ago for I think something like $4 billion, which looks like a great deal now. And there's speculation that maybe Netflix would want to do something like buy Formula One, with how successful Drive to Survive has been and how the popularity of Formula One has increased. Netflix may be more hesitant about getting into live sports rights purchases, renting, maybe more interested in owning.
They do own the Philadelphia Flyers.
Well done, Chris.
Yeah. So
does Comcast owns the Flyers, or does like the owner of Comcast own the Flyers?
It's Comcast Spectacor.
Mm-hmm.
Owns the Philadelphia Flyers, and if you're in Philadelphia too, they have like branded Comcast, NBC Universal, like Philadelphia Flyers, like restaurant too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Comcast is headquartered in Philadelphia. I understand.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in knowing like I mean, we've seen like Turner used to own WCW, and obviously the Atlanta Braves and the Atlanta Hawks. I don't know, is a sports team comparable to WWE? Like, I understand the logic people use, which is like they're already paying so much money yearly. Why would they? Why would you pay to rent when you can pay to own? I wonder what would happen with the company like running like this whole major entertainment entity where they're not. I guess they would be in that theory they would become the sole television partner, right? Fox would be muscled out if Comcast owned it.
I would think.
But they could also sell, couldn't they? Would that be something that would be prevented from legally? Could they still have like Raw on USA and SmackDown on Fox if Comcast owned the whole thing?
I would let's say that Comcast and NBC bought and somehow finalized WWE next month. There would still be a contract for SmackDown on Fox. I would think that they would just let that run out and then put SmackDown on the USA Network or something like that, because it's just a better value for them than selling the rights. That's what I think would happen. We can go to questions probably now.
Yeah.
To Gullo.
We got a few super chats here. We'll start with Joseph Carino. Just kind of a statement from I have my own issues for not liking Vince McMahon, but I marvel how damn smart he is in knowing his audience. He knew he was going to get cheered.
Yes. Thanks for the super chat, Joseph.
Right here. And then we have a few from MJ. As I scroll down. Very busy today in the chat, by the way. But this one here, who are the top 3 largest, I believe it means institutional buyers, INST, in Q1?
Institutional buyers? I can easily tell you who the top institutional owners are. I don't know that the buyers are as easy to find out. And I don't think companies have to disclose, unless they're making massive moves, right? I think they're making small moves all the time. So if I go to W's corporate website and I look under institutional ownership, the number 1 institutional owner is, well, we all know this off the top of our head, don't we, here in Wrestlenomics University? Linsdell Train, the UK firm. Anybody have any guesses what's number 2 and number 3?
Vanguard's 2, right?
They're always competing, I think. But yes, Vanguard is, according to this, what I'm looking at here as of February, Vanguard is number 3, and something else is number 2.
It's the one I always forget.
It's a neighborhood in Buffalo that I used to live in. And you too.
Oh, BlackRock.
BlackRock
Yes.
Inc., yes.
Yeah, BlackRock,
Yes. So those are the top 3 owners. I'm not sure about buyers. And I don't know if there's a way to look that up. Thanks for the super chat, MJ.
And he had another one. In what universe would an analyst think WWE should be up 100% in 2022?
And is that what I might have it in the notes here as far as what they raised their targets to and from? I want to say that Morgan Stanley raised their target. It might just be on the fly here. If I go to the Fly's website, I think they have it, which is where you can, if you go to thefly.com and I look under WWE, yeah. So Morgan Stanley has raised their target on Wednesday from $60 to $75. Remember, W shares are about 62 and a half as of the close Friday. Morgan Stanley raised it from 60 to 75. So to be up year to date 100%, W would have to be, let's see, year to date. At the beginning of the year, they were at about 50, just under 50, 49 and 86 cents. So they would have to be a $100 stock. They were a $100 stock for a very brief time where they were clearly in a bubble following TV rights speculation. I don't know if anybody's got a $100 target on WWE. That would be way too high to me.
He continues. Another super chat. Who pays more to rent year over year when revenue going down? I believe it's revenue means they're going down.
Who pays more to rent? Oh, I see. Yeah, it just speaks to the notion that it's more cost effective in the long term to buy a company like WWE rather than to continue to renew TV rights.
If you think that the TV rights are going to continue to be valuable in the way that they currently are, if you were to assume that perhaps cable television finally bites the dust and suddenly that this entity like WWE and live sports is less valuable than maybe currently perceived, do you want to be the person holding the bag with, you made this huge investment and now suddenly the rights are not as valuable as you once thought? But that's probably years down the road.
Even if cable, and I'm not convinced that cable's ever going to completely go away. I think
right. We're now a long time into that speculation where
I think there's always going to be a function for live, right? But anyway, I think even if, where are we going here? Even if cable bites the dust or something, I don't know that necessarily means that live sports rights bite the dust. As long as those are still way more popular than other stuff, as long as there's still this great disparity or stratification in popularity and in viewership, even though that viewership is declining over time, even though Raw is doing a fraction of what it did 10 years ago, let's say, in terms of total viewers, as long as Raw does, which it still does, is often the most watched cable program on Monday night, for example, I think sports rights are, and as long as there's a big difference between number 1 and let's say number 10, which there is, it's an exponential shaped curve. As long as that's the shape of the curve, I think there's still going to be strong value in live sports and sports like things like pro wrestling, as long as there's this strong disparity in popularity. Yeah. Regardless of what the media distribution means are, whether that's traditional cable systems or whether that's some other distribution means like streaming.
All right, we have another super chat there. This is from Danny Valentin. Could you see a scenario where Tony Khan swoops in and buys WWE? And I saw a lot of this on Twitter, and I kind of shook my head at it too.
Why? No. That's a lot of money. It's one thing to ask your dad for a few $100 million. It's another thing to ask your dad for a few billion, or several billion. I don't think there would be antitrust scrutiny around it, but no, I highly doubt it.
I've seen a lot of people speculate that Tony Khan could be brought in to run the creative side of WWE if something were to happen to Vince. I think that's based purely on the idea that Tony has been the first person to kind of show to be majorly successful running a creative wrestling on the creative end of a wrestling company that isn't WWE in a couple of decades. But again, I don't think there'd be any incentive for Tony to do anything with WWE, unless it becomes like a full-fledged like WCW situation where the company is available for peanuts on the dollar, which I don't think anyone would expect to ever happen.
And I think that's a wrestling fan perspective, and I think the broader media world, that is the world that WWE lives in much more so than AEW lives in, doesn't view AEW as like to like as we do.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think, when I say we, I mean we. I think we're more right about that, and I don't think wrestling, especially the creative aspect of wrestling, okay, the creative aspect of wrestling is like this thing that only Vince McMahon has figured out, because I don't think I think has a tremendously strong brand that obfuscates issues with creative. But anyway.
All right, we two more super chats to go here, including another one from MJ here. Oh, we have another super chat. Okay, very busy day. MJ, whalewisdom.com to answer the first question that he had with the institutional buyers. And now we have two super chats from Tim B. I'll do his most recent one here as Jarrett's return. VKM's insurance, like Jerry Jarrett was in '94. I do find this interesting that somebody could possibly run the wrestling side of things.
I mean, it's another kind of meme that Jeff Jarrett, or Jeffrey Jarrett, as he was. There's like a graphic welcoming all the latest new employees to WWE, including Jeffrey Jarrett, who's now the new VP of live events booking. I think Bruce Pritchard would be there first. I think even Paul Levesque would be there first before Jeff Jarrett.
I'm much more interested in the concept of Cody eventually inheriting the role as creative in WWE.
Yes.
That's very interesting. And then Tim B with another super chat. Brandon, is Jesse your insurance against Gullo threatening to no-show again? Never no-showed. I've given notice unless you pay him more, or just developing a new star for the future. And this has been a very heated conversation between Tim B and Ragnar Lothbrok throughout the chat today.
Oh, wow. I'll have to review that in post. I know you try to get me over a barrel here like you did last time. Fool me once, shame on me. You're not going to fool me twice, Chris Gullo.
As soon as he comes back.
Listen, I'm happy. I was very happy to have Jesse, right? We could add a third person, a fourth person. I'm a team player. Okay.
Yeah, you're thrilled with your business partners. You love your business partners.
Yes. Yeah.
My goal is to become relevant enough for Tim B to spell my name correctly. You know,
Oh,
people really insist that JESSIE is like how a lot of people assume to spell my name. It happens a lot during emails at work and such, and that's a way less common way to spell Jesse. I have the most common spelling of it by far, but for whatever reason, the JESSIE has a hold on certain people where they just assume that's how to spell it.
Okay. Is that all of them? Is that all the super chats?
that is all. It was a very busy day, but that is all. Yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate everybody tuning in, and we appreciate everybody's super chats for sure. This was a pretty big audience. We had a big audience on Wednesday for our breaking news special too. So I think that's all we have to get through here. I appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll be back obviously next week. Every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, we stream this live. And of course, you can find the audio version in your podcast app, wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Jesse, you have any plugs to give?
Just to follow me at Jesse Collings, like it says on the screen. On Twitter, that's where you'll get most of my stuff. I recorded an episode of my podcast, Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, on Friday with Jason Unpresser, Wrestlenomics contributor.
Another member of the Wrestlenomics family, yes.
Yes, that's the sprawling, growing. You're like the Dudley family now. You're going to have different, just various members. But we talked a lot about the Vince news. We did a lot of speculation about what we think the company would look like if Vince were no longer around, and kind of fantasy created some ideas. It's one of those things where we were recording it. We're like, I hope nothing breaks while we're recording it, but nothing as really major has come out in the last few days, so it's still relevant. So people can check that out.
And that's on YouTube, right?
Yes, it's on YouTube. You can find it. Just Google or just YouTube search Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I was also on Josh Nason's Punch Out a couple of weeks ago. People can find that. That's a free show that's on the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Figure 4 Online website. So also making an appearance on that. So I'm just making the rounds on all the various wrestling media podcasts, shopping myself to the highest bidder, really.
Mm-hmm. And Gullo, anything new with RTI and things like that?
No, just, I mean, if you haven't, catch up on the Burt Prentice episodes. Like I said, the last one we talked about how he literally had a WWE developmental deal and a WCW developmental deal within probably a span of 3 months. And at one point there was talent on both on his shows, which is very interesting. And we kind of talk about the beginning of TNA and his role in that. And really, this should be the last episode that will be released later this month. Kind of going to basically him leaving TNA to USA Championship Wrestling, and and unfortunately his passing, and what impact that will have on Southern independent wrestling. So.
Okay, and as always, you can subscribe to Wrestlenomics on Patreon, patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. You get access to my TV ratings reports that come out basically every weekday. Quarter hours. There should be a quarter hours update coming soon. Jason Unpresser was helping me out with that, as this was a very busy news week. So I should be having I hope to get that done Sunday, today, as we record this. You also get access to the Who's a Draw podcast that we did, and we'll be doing a company popularity update in this month, later this month, I believe, to catch up on the one that we missed on Wednesday. So, and you also get access to all the data, the Wrestlenomics viewership spreadsheet, in addition to that. So thanks to everybody for listening and supporting again. Thanks to Post Wrestling for being our podcast distribution partner. A lot of great reporting and conversations coming from Post Wrestling this week related to this story as well that everybody should check out. So thanks again, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.